Okay, good morning, everybody. My name is Fay, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar today. We all know that a strong brand is a marker of quality and of the origin of your product. So how do you develop it? Why might you rebrand? And once you've invested that time and resource, how do you protect it? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Before we begin, I just have some housekeeping things to run through with you. A recording will be made available to you afterwards, and that will be sent to you by way of email. Each of our speakers is going to have 10 minutes each at the beginning to run through their perspectives. And following that, there will be a question and answer session. Please put any questions that you have in the Q&A box. The questions will only be visible to the panelists, so please feel free to untick the anonymous box and we can follow up with you afterwards if you'd like us to. A feedback survey is going to pop up in your browser after the session, and we'd be delighted if you could please let us have your views. And any feedback will be welcome. Our first speaker today is Lesley Gulliver. She's the Managing Director of the strategic brand consultancy firm, The Engine Room. The Engine Room has been helping its clients since 2001. She's going to take us through her process for developing a successful brand. So over to you, Lesley.
Thank you very much, Fay. I will just share my screen. That's a lovely introduction. Thank you very much, Fay, and really pleased to have been invited to speak today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges around branding when businesses are in particular stages of their growth, also some of the risks, but also some of the benefits of branding, and talk you through what I believe is a really useful process to be thinking about if you're to engage on a kind of visual identity development project. So yes, as Fay said, I'm Lesley. I'm the Managing Director of The Engine Room. We're based in Murfield, and we are a small strategic company. There are 12 of us. So we do everything that you might imagine a design agency to do. That is around brand positioning and planning. We talk a lot about language. So rebranding is not about a new logo. Okay, it's sometimes you end up with a shiny new logo at the end of the process. There's so much more to it than that. And we spend a lot of time working with businesses to really understand who they are, what they stand for, what's their big vision, what's their purpose, what are their principles, what's their personality, all of which is so vital when it comes to communicating to audiences. We do product naming, company naming. We obviously do create visual identities, messaging and tone of voice, and then subsequently kind of campaign development. So when you do have a brand, it's got legs and you've got kind of months and years ahead of communications capacity moving forward. We work with lots of different businesses. Some of those you'll recognise, some of them international, huge organisations, some SMEs. We get loads of pleasure working with SMEs because we get to talk really closely with the key decision makers and some really, really passionate people. So manufacturing, service, technology businesses, you can see there we're going to be talking about Vapour today as a technology business, but we also work for the public sector. Do lots of work also in the healthcare sector. So why might a business be thinking about rebranding? This is one example of a growth model, Griner's growth model, but there's lots out there, as you know. When we start up a business, it's always really tricky to invest in brand because we don't have any money. So we kind of cobble together and do what we can to have a presence that's as credible as possible. But often as we kind of move through particular stages of growth, we get more investment in the business, and we think about how we might start to sort of stand head and shoulders above the competition. And there are various points of growth, and then perhaps plateauing, and then growth again, and then plateauing as we move through to a kind of high growth scenario. And during that growth phase of a business, there are lots of challenges, and there are lots of challenges that actually can lead to a kind of conclusion that we need to really think about how we present ourselves in the marketplace. So, is it about moving to the next level of growth? Is it that messaging has evolved and we've just kind of cobbled it all together, and now we need to get to a point where we grow up and create some consistency, so we're not trying to reinvent the wheel every time we put a message out there? Is it simply that we need to turn up the volume on our marketing and sales and have a more credible presence? Are we entering new markets? Have we done some really good stuff that we need to shout about, so reflecting the developments internally? Do we need to launch a new product? Is there more competition coming onto the market that we need to make sure that we kind of raise our game, I suppose? Also, being known for one thing. I think another challenge that lots of sort of smaller businesses, but startup businesses perhaps particularly, fall prey to is sort of being all things to all people. So, we just say yes when we start our business because we just need to generate revenue, and we're just pleased somebody's asked us to do a job. So as we mature, it's kind of really important that we become really clear on what our one purpose is, what we're really strong at. So we're not suggesting that we do all things to all people. Brand architecture. As you develop and you create sort of sectors or divisions within your business or a range of products, it's often important to think about how you name and brand those divisions and those products. Because if you do that randomly, you'll soon get to a point where actually you've got real inconsistency. So how do we bring everything together and tie everything together in a brand architecture that supports the business? Also, attracting new talent are really important in terms of recruitment, aligning the business culturally. So as we grow, we bring on new staff, we grow quickly, we kind of lose a bit of control, and then suddenly we think, hang on a minute, we need to really be clear about what our values are. And then of course at the higher end of the scale, when we're talking about mergers and acquisitions, branding becomes really important in terms of not just presenting ourselves as a key player, but also potentially when merging, making sure that we align brands as they come together. There are some risks involved, of course, and perhaps the first one I should say that it's costly. It can be costly to develop your rebrand, and because there is an investment involved, it's really important to get your objectives right. If you go into a rebranding project saying where we need a new logo and we need a new website, but you don't link it to any objectives, it feels kind of I guess slightly superficial. So what are your strategic objectives? What are you trying to achieve? How are you going to measure that? Other businesses, you might be surprised, will kind of rock up at a brand consultancy and say, okay, yeah, we need a rebrand. Well, why do you need a rebrand? Where's your brief? Who are your target audiences, etc.? Choosing the wrong design partner. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how to go about selecting the right design partner. Make sure you don't just do a paint job. This is not about, as I say, a shiny new logo. It's actually about really getting under the skin of your business and presenting it effectively, but also authentically to the outside world. Make sure that you get buy-in across the organization. We find that the best branding projects are those that consult with as many people within the organization at all levels as possible. This isn't a top down. Much of our work involves talking to some of the people who are kind of on the front line, on the shop floor, making sure we get from them what it's really like to work within an organization. It's all right talking to the directors, and that's of course vital and really useful, but also we get some real insights and grains of truth, some of those people who are hands-on in the business on a day-to-day basis. And make sure the insight and the research is done. Make sure there are metrics in place. Think about inclusivity. It's really important to ensure diversity and inclusivity in your brands, and it's increasingly important just now. Make sure you launch it properly. It's okay rebranding, but if you don't tell anybody about it, you kind of question its value really. And then intellectual property. So things like design rights and copyrights are really, really important, and Claire's going to talk a little bit about that later on this morning. So when you do come to write your brief, we will be circulating these slides, so these are some key points to include. Make sure you write this down. What's your business all about? Tell us why you're rebranding. What's the background to the project? What does your market look like? What are the challenges that you're currently facing in your market? Who are your audiences? What's the competition up to? We don't want to make you look like your competition. We need to make you look different to your competition. So we need to thoroughly review the competition, hear what they're saying. Think about what you need to deliver. Is it a new identity? Is it a kind of a website? Do you have literature? Do you attend exhibitions? Do you have business cards? Do you need literature to leave behind at meetings, all of those things, think about them individually and get them down in the brief, because if you're asking a design agency to cost, you want to make sure you see their costs up front. You don't want any sort of nasty surprises further down the line. Measurements and outcomes we've talked about. Always I suppose a kind of controversial one. Should you include your budget in your brief? I think it's quite important, if you do have a budget, to include it, because it gives a real steer as to your level of ambition, the level of involvement that the design agency can have, how much research they'll be able to do. What are your timeframes? So what are your deadlines? Who's involved? Who are the decision makers from your side? Any constraints? So any hurdles that you see ahead? And of course, as much information, additional information, attachments that you can provide will really help your design agency to understand what it is you're trying to achieve. But it also, most importantly, puts you in charge of the procurement process. You need to be really clear what you're buying. And if you're not familiar with buying design, it can be really tricky. It's not bricks and mortar, so it can sometimes feel a little bit subjective. So make sure you're in charge. Don't turn up at a design agency and expect, and without a brief, without a written down brief, because there's a real risk that you could be taken on a kind of trail that perhaps you don't want to go on. I would suggest that you go out to tender. By that, what I mean is, invite 3 or 4 agencies, perhaps that have been recommended or that are thoroughly researched, so that you are not just seeing kind of 1 or 2, but you get to see a spectrum of approaches. And I would also advise that you don't ask design agencies to deliver free creative work at pitch stage. So before you selected to work with a design company, don't ask them to do any free work, because the chances are they will not put, without doing the research, I would question how valuable that creative work will be. So a process that the engine room goes through, and I'm going to canter through this a little bit, but it's kind of headline really. 4 phases from my perspective. First phase is thorough, detailed insight, research and consultation. So this is about talking to your customers. After that is brand strategy development. So we haven't even touched felt tip pens yet. We're actually talking about strategy. So what's the kind of key messages? What's the architecture going to look like? And the visual identity is when we start to put together conceptual designs for you to review, and subsequently and importantly, design guidelines for implementation, so that when you finish with your brand, you have real clarity as to how to implement that moving forward. So Carol is going to talk a little bit about her experience of phase 1, but there's lots of really interesting tools and techniques that we use in our research and insight phase to really draw out from you and the individuals within the organisation what your personality is, what you do, who you do it for, who are your stakeholders, what keeps them awake at night, how do you solve their problems, what's good, what's bad, what's an opportunity. So a rose thorn bird exercise, we call it. And also on the left there, brand canvas we use, which is really, I suppose, the engine room's interpretation. We put our own stamp on I suppose, a variation of the business model canvas, but it helps us in a really short space of time really understand your ambition, your competition, your routes to market, your target audiences. So really vital. I mean, we also do we spend a lot of time talking to your customers, and also individuals within your business. So phase 2, development of brand strategy. Here we'll come back to a client with an analysis of findings. What have we found out? What has it led us to conclude? What are the 5 Ps, we call them, in your business? So what's your purpose, proposition, principles, personality and positioning? So important. They're the bedrock, the cornerstones to your brand. The language is important because that's what everything else hangs on. So what you stand for. Brand architecture I've talked about, and also what are the most effective communication tools strategically to help you achieve your objectives. Only then, phase 3, do we move on to visual identity, and then we will be starting to take some of the language that we've presented into and put a real creative spin on that. Look at identities as in logos, and create visual toolkits. So how do you use that? How do you apply it to digital and traditional communications methods within your business. And I talked about guidelines and implementation. It's no good investing in a brand delivered to you by a design company, and then every time you come to use it, you start sort of messing about with it, or you kind of maybe stretch the logo a little bit, or you kind of think, you overlay your own creativity, which is great in many ways, but actually within a short space of time, you might end up, excuse me, with a kind of movement away from where the brand was designed to be. Make sure when you're working with a design agency that they do all of the above, but also you understand the importance of the kind of project management, which obviously sits underneath and over the top of all of that, to make sure that your design agency, you've got confidence that they have the capacity to deliver to your deadlines, that they have confidence in working with senior stakeholders or senior individuals, whether that be your clients, your directors, or even your investors. Ensure that you understand your design company's response to a slight shift in brief. It often happens as we go through a project. So how can the agency be flexible enough to accommodate a change of brief? Ensure that you're really clear on budgets from the outset. And yes, if briefs change during the course of a project, if a brief changes through the course of a project, budgets might change, but make sure all of those fees are quoted and accepted in advance. Remote working, obviously, we're moving out of lockdown, but there are lots of fantastic tools. I'm sure you may be familiar with Mural or Miro. Those are tools which are fantastic for running workshops remotely with people all over the country, if not all over the world. And also the project management tools. I mean, we use a number of tools at the engine room to ensure that we're running our projects effectively commercially. Designers are great at creative thinking, but what's really vital is that they're also really good commercially in terms of running the business and ensuring that you're kept up to speed on the project, ensuring it's on time and on budget. I'm going to, just for a second, stop sharing my screen because I think I need to enable my sound. So bear with me 2 seconds, if that's okay with you, Fay.
Yes, that's fine, Lesley. I'm just got half an eye on the time, and I'm conscious that obviously we've got Carol from Vapour as well, so that's no problem.
Okay, Vapour, I'm going to let Carol talk about this project. I'm not going to go into any detail at all, but that's how they looked on the right. They talked about their business in terms of what they did and their products, which was interesting, but if we felt really like there were some opportunities to turn up the volume in terms of their solutions. We did lots of insight, all of the stuff that I've talked about, and we developed a purpose which was around demystifying cloud technology for business. We started to make the language benefits-led rather than product-led, and we started to create language which is centered around the personality of the business. You can see some of those messages there, which translate then into brand principles. So it's really important that we share those with our internal staff so we understand how they translate into behaviours. A brand proposition which is clear and consistent, can be used across the board. We work with you to unlock growth, drive change, boost productivity. Simple and clever. And then we can start to develop an identity that builds on all of that messaging and positions Vapour where they need to be in a very successful business, but moving to its next level of growth. You can see there's opportunity then to create campaign messaging that can be used in the months and years ahead, how that rolls into implementation and communications tools. And there's a very short video here before I finish, Fay. Thank you very much. That's all from me. I'm sorry if I went over time there.
Not a problem at all, Lesley. Thank you so much. That's really, really useful, practical insights in terms of how you would go about the branding process. Carol, I feel like you don't need an introduction now, but I will briefly introduce you. So Vapour Cloud has just recently been through Lesley's process. You are the head of transformation and operations at Vapour Cloud, and your cloud technology enables your customers, amongst other things, to drive change and boost productivity. So how was your experience of going through the rebranding process?
Yeah, morning all. Thanks, thank you, Faye. Yeah, so hopefully I'm coming to it from the opposite side of the table. So not with a brand background, but what that user experience looked like. So more the why, the how, and ultimately what we gained from that. We engaged with Lesley's team almost 2 years ago, and that was in the back of Skin into 2020 as part of the senior management team, where we were looking at our growth strategy, but over that sort of next 3-year plan. So we sort of started with where we wanted to go. What did that look like? And part of that then was going into new sector as part of our segments, and also new products. And it was quite evident during that our branding would need to be looked at. So from front to end, so that whole interface from our website, from our communication, from our toolkits, etc. And it was more about, I suppose, our terminology as well. Particularly in tech, it's easy to get lost in the jargon. We know what we're referring to, we know what we're talking about, but it does, particularly getting into a new sector, somebody landing on our website think, oh, they're for me, or no, they don't look like they're for me. So that couldn't be sort of off-putting. So really putting that human element into it. And as Lesley's spoken about, as a sort of new tech business startup, we were conscious of brands that had been there, but it's kind of organically over the years lost its message, different inputs, different thoughts, and very much led on the product, which again, I think is something that technology firms do, thinking the product will sell. And whilst it is important, it's also important, I think, for your client base to understand your purpose and your why, and what your values are, what you stand for, can be as much of a decision-making process. So we kind of also looked at market research and sort of feedback on statistics, and really it's less than about 12% of clients are looking, it's based on price. A lot of it's based around sharing similar values, what your ethics are, and did we have that message coming across. So we wanted to be known for our teams as much as our technology. Our aim is to be working with partners and working with our clients and almost be an extension to them and not just be product led. So that was part of the driver, was around our growth strategy, but being consistent with our language, being consistent with our approach, and really that we sort of would grown up from being that business sort of startup where it was all bright colours and this is the product, but who were we now and what was our purpose, and how we were differentiating from the competition as well. We're doing on products great, so can everybody else. So the process was really interesting. It was good for us. As I say, we reached out to Lesley. We found a partner that we wanted to work with. We presented what the drivers were for us, where we were looking to go, why we felt the need for change. And the senior management team were involved in the workshops there. But we also engaged then with the entire team, because they're the ones that are going to live and breathe the brand afterwards, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, subconsciously, in their communication with customers. The workshops really quite quickly, it was evident that personality was key. So we went through a very interesting process of describing the business as a celebrity. Who did you see as being that celebrity there? And that workshop was also given out to our teams as well, of which the senior management team weren't part of. So it was very an open discussion. So what was the personality? And to see where that kind of slotted in and where we were then standing out and being different. The employee engagement was key. They understood the why. So I think it was important there as well that this wasn't just an exercise as to a new colour or a new idea. It was why. So they understood where we were going, why we were going into this, why we were going to emphasise it on a project, and put the time and the dedication into that and get the buy-in from the team. And ultimately, what we've gained from it, it's improved an entire end-to-end customer experience. So whether that be prospect clients, existing clients, retaining clients. So all our social interfaces, so from our website to our social media, to our internal documentation, our toolkits, even right through to induction packs and our playbooks when we have new starters coming on board. And whilst, and I think Lesley, you alluded to it as well, which was, whilst it was about the brand and how you look to clients and prospects, it was also about attracting and retaining best talent as well. So if somebody's coming forward for an interview or putting their CV to you, where's the first place they're going? Is your website, and so you get a feel for, that's a company that I want to work for, that I can see where it's going, they've got similar values to me, and actually have bought into it. So what has ignited that sort of passion in them? Again, our message was around, whilst technology can be exciting, only people can be excited by technology. So getting that message across with our brand was really important. And it very much is aligned into the cultures as well. So we used it in terms of reshaping our values. We had our company values, and whilst the behaviours haven't changed, we're more in line with the wording of our brand, and the wording to the outside world matches quite internally then with our values internally, and how we live and breathe that brand, and that it forms part of the DNA of our teams. And really it was just, as I say, the message out to customers as to what was our purpose and why we were there. That's all I was really wanting to kind of cover, just really as I say, the experience from start to finish. It was an enjoyable experience, but if I had any piece of advice, as I say, it would be engage your employees and set it as a project as well, and treat it as much as you do any transformational project. We pretty much go with an approach of, we have no more than 5 major projects internally in transformation at any one time. And the rebranding formed part of that. It wasn't just a sideline. So giving it the attention that it needed, treating it as a project, and being really clear on the objectives. It was for going forward. It was our 3-year plan, and beyond. And it can be quite costly to go back over that plan as well. So make sure you get it right. And as Leslie's kind of covered, that the brief's there, that it's quite clear, and be open to change as well. Don't get sort of caught up on an idea that's your branding partner wants to change, but that was your idea originally, and you're there. So go with quite an open mind to it and see what that looks like, and most definitely planning the launch as well. So we made sure that our teams were involved. It was shared with them before it was launched to the outside world. We had that planned in as well, as to when was the key points and when was the right time in which to launch it as well. So not to rush it, but to kind of keep up the momentum there, but picking your plan and your strategy plan as well was just as important.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Carol. It's really helpful to have the other side of the experience as well as us as professionals just talking through our process. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. I must say to anybody who's attending, if you have any burning questions, please do put those in the Q&A box. As I said, feel free to untick the anonymization tick box. The questions will only be visible to us panelists, and it will enable us to follow up with you afterwards if you'd like us to do so. Now to introduce our third speaker, Claire O'Brien. She is our head of intellectual property litigation at Mills Reeve. And clearly, if you have been through the type of project and invested the time and resource that Carol and Lesley have both just described, Claire, you then want to be able to protect all that time and resource and the output of it. So you've got a huge array of experience in protection of brands, and I was just wondering if you could take us through some practical steps that people need to be aware of when they're looking to protect their new brand.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Faye, and hello, everybody. Just listening actually to my fellow panelists, it reinforces actually the amount of work and strategic thinking and soul searching you need to do before you get to this kind of stage. And I notice in Leslie's slides, there's a flag there for intellectual property, which is the element that I'm going to focus on. So in terms of what I'm going to speak about today, 3 things I'd like to cover really. First, the importance of registering your intellectual property rights, and I'll do a quick trot through the various rights. And then secondly, the importance of monitoring for infringement of those rights, and perhaps having a budget to deal with, setting a budget to deal with them. And that's going to be more important as your brand becomes more and more successful, because people like to emulate it. And then thirdly, a brief overview of the tools available to you for dealing with any infringement, and whether you should take action in the first place, and what you can do if you do come across infringements. Okay, so firstly, this is mainly a branding talk, so I'm thinking trademarks. So these are signs which distinguish the goods and services of one undertaking from those of other undertakings, and they can come in a number of forms, and we've discussed some of them today. They can be words, designs, letters, numerals, even colours, sounds, or shapes. So there are a wide array of things that you can protect as a trademark. In terms of the research phase and coming up with a short list of names, I think it's really important to, Lesley talked about knowing what your competitors are doing. And I think it's really important to conduct clearance searches against your list of names before you focus on, or settle on one, to just check that there's no other brand out there with the same name operating in a similar field, which might cause you difficulties in the future. If you fail to do your clearance searching, and go ahead with one name and kind of just blindly go ahead with it, it could come back to bite you at a later stage when you have invested significantly in your brand, and it could actually precipitate it could be a name change, and that could be costly if you have already invested in your branding. So do think about clearance searching before you settle on your name. So trademarks themselves are a valuable IP right. They can be a perpetual monopoly, because you can renew them every 10 years from the date of registration, and they can go on and on and on. I think one of the most important things with trademarks is they should be distinctive, not descriptive of the kind of things you're doing, and that will ease its path through to registration. You can acquire distinctiveness through use of a trademark, but it's always useful to come up with something which sets you apart from your competitors, and that harks back again to what Lesley was talking about. So think about the goods and services that you are selling and what you might sell in the future, and consider some defensive registrations in terms of where your brand is now, what the goods and services that you're selling, but what might we branch into in the future, and consider protecting that. Also think about the jurisdictions in which to register your trademarks, not just where your business is now, but again where it might go in the future. Another tip is think about protecting your brand in counterfeiting hotspots like China or elsewhere, because those countries have a first to file regime whereby they may not be the brand owner, but if they get there first to register their mark to put their mark on the register, they can cause problems with the original brand owner. So think about protecting your brand in necessary jurisdictions you might go into, and also where there are counterfeiting hotspots. And once you've got your marks, you use the R in a circle to let the world know that you have trademark protection. Don't forget your domain names. And I just again emphasize the importance of registration, because you can protect unregistered trademarks through the law of passing off, but it's a lot more difficult in terms of when it comes to a legal case. It's a lot more difficult to make it out for unregistered rights than it is for registered rights. So it's always good to give this some thought at an early stage of the strategic thinking and planning. Lesley also mentioned copyright, and that doesn't need to be registered. It arises automatically, and it lasts a long time. Can be life of the author plus 70 years, and it protects works such as literary, artistic, dramatic, and musical works. And those works have to be original, and there are various qualification requirements. Now, a point to think about is ownership of the copyright. So the author is usually the first owner of copyright. But where a work is made in the course of employment, then the employer is the first owner of copyright. So make sure, if you do want to alter the position set out in statute, that you have agreements in place as to who owns the copyright and who has rights in that regard. Also, don't forget about designs. Broadly, the landscape of designs is multi-layered in this jurisdiction. And following actually Brexit, that we're not part of the community rights system anymore. But broadly, it follows two. There are UK registered rights and UK unregistered rights. They have different requirements and different lengths of time in terms of the period of the monopoly that you get for those rights. But don't forget about designs, because they are quite a useful right. And the final right that I just want to mention today is patents. So those protect inventions. It's got to be new, not obvious, and they've got to be capable of industrial application. They last for 20 years, so it's a long monopoly, and those rights are territorial. So that's just a quick canter through actually the main IP rights that you might want to think about. But in the context of branding, I think trademarks is key, and registering those marks and making sure that they are distinctive is key. Now, just moving on to my second topic, which is monitoring for infringements. You can, if you do have a trademark, you can set up trademark watching services for anybody making applications which may conflict with your own mark, and those services will give you a heads up, and you can then decide to take action to oppose them if you wanted to. But generally, and this is just business sense, common sense really, actively monitor for infringements, both online, physical outlets, trade fairs, to see whether anybody is stepping on your toes. Online platforms such as Amazon and eBay have their own takedown procedures that you can use to take down any infringing infringements that you come across. And there are also some advanced brand protection platforms such as Red Points, which find and remove online counterfeit listings. So there are a number of avenues you can go down. And also with the internet, I would say, because people you can hide behind the anonymity of the internet. And also it changes very fast. So when you do spot something that's not quite right, or somebody stepping on your toes, make sure you take screenshots, gather the evidence, date the evidence. Websites can change very fast, and it's useful to have that kind of stuff when it comes to trying to enforce your rights. And another tip I would say is that if you do come across infringements, keep your garden weeded, in terms of if you let infringements run rife, your mark can become diluted, and it can really undermine all the investment that you put into that strategy that Lesley talked about, and Carola talked about the who and why and what we're doing, and so do keep your garden weeded and look out for infringements. And just finally, on the what do you do? What tools are available to you for dealing with infringements? Well, as I mentioned, some of the online platforms have their own reporting and takedown procedures. There are abuse emails that you can write to, abuse report forms that you can fill in. There are various reporting bodies you can explain the problem to, in terms of there's Action Fraud, which is connected with the police, and also the National Cyber Security Centre. They have reporting mechanisms for problems that you may encounter online. Other bodies that might be able to help you, although they do have limited budgets, are people like local and national trading standards. If they take up your case, they can be very, very helpful. And then if you've got issues with domain names, you can file domain names complaints with either WIPO or Nominet. Is my sound okay? It's just okay, great. Apart from that, if you wanted to escalate a letter of claim, get specialist advice on a letter of claim. Don't send these out willy-nilly. You can get into trouble if you send out very broadly drafted letters threatening your opponents. So I would say take specialist advice on that, and that's the next step of escalation. And obviously, then if that doesn't sort out the problem, consider issuing proceedings. There are a number of different routes that you can take in relation to this. There are some courts whose procedures have been designed specifically with SMEs in mind. I know Lesley said she liked acting for SMEs, and I do too. You often get the person at the heart of the business, the Intellectual Property Enterprise Court is a forum specifically designed for SMEs to try and enforce their right and give them access to justice. Whereas prior to the reform of procedures, it was really very prohibitively expensive for a business, particularly a startup, to take action. And then there's the High Court. And other alternative dispute resolution procedures can be deployed without prejudice discussions or mediations. There's a whole plethora of alternative dispute resolution if you do get into if you do want to resolve your dispute outside the court system. And I think really that was all I wanted to say about the 3 points that I raised. But I'm very happy to take any questions.
Fantastic, Claire. Thank you ever so much. And hopefully people will have gained useful information from all three speakers today, but particularly yours in terms of the practical advice and actually protecting the branding. What I should mention just before I hand over to Kirsty, who is going to host the Q&A section of the webinar, is that our contact details, the details of these speakers was contained on the invitation to the event. So if you want to connect with any of us on LinkedIn or have any questions, then obviously please do take advantage of that information. Kirsty, over to you.
Thank you, Faye. Yep, so we've got some questions in. If everybody just wants to keep putting your questions into the Q&A box, and as Faye's mentioned, they will come to the panelists only, so feel free to remove the anonymity. I think a question first for Claire. Claire, would you say, is there any kind of one step that a business should take in terms of IP protection? Obviously, you talked about clearance searches, and you talked as well about keeping an eye on infringement. Would one of those be a first step, or the one thing that you would say people should get on board with if they haven't done any IP protection in the past?
Well, I think if you're thinking about IP already, you have started thinking along the right lines. So what struck me when listening to the other speakers was the amount of planning that goes into these things and planning ahead. And it's the same with developing an IP protection strategy as well. Plan ahead. For a trademark, choose a distinctive name, have an awareness of what competitors are doing, and that's your research phase that Lesley talked about. Check that, do your clearance searching and register your rights. I think that's quite good advice. So it's mainly what I was talking about in relation to the first point.
Brilliant, thank you. Carol and Lesley, if you have any further comments on the intellectual property aspects, please do share those as well. But let's see. Carol, a question for you, if that's okay. When you started out on your, before you engaged with the engine room, where did you start with formulating a strategy for a rebrand? Did it come with a change in client base?
Yeah, it started so at the beginning of 2020. We worked actually, the senior management team we joined a business growth strategy plan as part of Cambridge University. And the objective more was around like that, our verticals, our sectors, etc. But culture and branding formed part of it. And it was quite evident quite early on how that was going to actually form more of the growth strategy than possibly we'd thought at the beginning. There might have been a bit of change, but really appreciating how it had the full restructure was required and just where we were going and how we were we wanted to be known as, which was a solution provider. And we were very much at that point, product, this is the products that we have, look what this can do. But I had quite lost our why. We had our story, and it was there, but I think over time you lose sight of that, and it's what the next product is, and we certainly had lost, I think, the human element of it. So really getting that down, so it was clear by the time we were reaching out to Lesley and her team what the real goal and objective was, and what that being a 3-year thing and not just be
Wow.
a temporary. So we want to do this, so do that, but what did the 3 years sort of look like? So really sort of getting that down as part of it, and kind of probably going back to basics and actually reminding ourselves what we were there for and what started this journey and this passion. And maybe we just got a bit sort of lost in it. So just needed to, I think, go back to basics and really question ourselves as to why did we start this in the first place?
Brilliant, thank you. And just linked to that, you mentioned about getting your employees involved with the stages of the rebranding and everything. How did you manage that process so that you were communicating effectively with your employees and getting them involved in that process?
Yeah. So the team were very much aware. They were very much aware. Even when the senior management team were going on our business growth strategy planning, as I say, explaining the why. So why we were going down that road. Asking them to take a step back and look at it again. When you're in the bubble, it's hard to see what somebody from the outside is saying. We know what that jargon means. We know what we meant by that, but seeing it through fresh eyes, getting constructive feedback as well. We'd had quite constructive feedback from third parties. So just going on and looking at our website, what do you see as our colour? What do you see as our key message? And being honest with that, and again, our customer feedback. But I think certainly the team known the ultimate objective, and again, it's not, this is just for marketing. So what was the real objective of it, where it was going, and why that was going to, our growth plan. So therefore, our growth plan in terms of the business. So, growing the business, what opportunities then are going to come internally. But I think it was really important, and Lesley's team were really good at this. As I say, everybody was involved. It was quite creative workshops, so it's enjoyable, it's not scary. But I'm quite an advocate of the teams were advised in advance of what was going to be involved. It's quite easy for these workshops then to be led with the extroverts in the room, but what were the introverts? So I think that step ahead, and most definitely that step of associating the business as a celebrity, was quite a unique approach to it. It got imagination going. We had everything from Lady Gaga to Cristiano Ronaldo's, Willy Wonka. I'm struggling now to remember some of them. But yeah, so the teams were involved. They knew it was coming up. They knew what was going to be required of them, and it gave them that chance then to come to the room forearmed, forewarned, and also they knew that it was an open forum as well. So, to speak, the senior management team weren't at those meetings either, but certainly prepping for your introverts. I'm always a big advocate of that, or else it can be led by the big characters. So everybody had the voice.
Brilliant. Okay. Open and early communication are the keys that I'm hearing from you. Thank you, Carol. So just had a couple of questions just come in, which Lesley, I'll call on you first of all, and then I think Carol, would be great to get your opinion on this as well. So the first one is it sensible for very small or new companies to do an in-house job on branding? And linked to that, which elements of the process would you absolutely recommend expert advice?
Okay, thank you. A good question. Is it sensible for very small or new companies to do an in-house job on branding? I think that sometimes you don't have a choice, because if you really are pre-start or early startup, you perhaps don't have a choice. However, and this is perhaps something that I'm really happy to advocate when working with clients, is that if you are going to invest anything, invest with a business that can work really strategically to find your differentiator. So the language is so vital, and I've said it, if I've said it once, I've said it a million times today. So work with a partner, a design partner, who can pull out your kind of key differentiators, the personality, the difference of your business, and bring that to life. I often say to new clients at the engine room that we recognise that ongoing investment in loads of collateral like literature and banners and exhibitions and websites, etc. Digital communications can be really expensive. But if you work and I'm really happy to say, if you want to work with a more cost-effective partner to roll that out, that seems like a really, really sensible thing to do, but get the strategic work up front right. And maybe, another thing that we'll sometimes do is, test that relationship out. So, maybe commission a business to do a small part of that strategic insight, creative upfront work. So you get to understand what it's like working with them, everyone gets to look in the whites of each other's eyes and see the value that comes out of that process. But yeah, it's tricky at startup stage. If you don't have the funds, it's really easy to kind of create your own logo, isn't it, digitally these days, or your husband's cousin's friend's auntie's son who's doing design at university. Be creative in your approach, but maybe find somebody who can support you in that process.
Brilliant, thank you. Carol, I wonder if you'd like to share a bit of a perspective on that as well, in terms of the aspects of the branding journey that you find to be most useful or most opening up your thinking to new ideas.
I think it's certainly more correlated internally for us in terms of culture for us as well. So what that message was going to be, and that we were living and breathing it. And also you need to keep it alive throughout. So this wasn't just a project that we did. And here we are, and we had now a new tagline or a new colour and a new logo, and that would be that. So it's keeping it alive continuously. Okay. So, and therefore I think that then forms part of our values, so which we speak about sort of monthly. It forms part of our team's objectives. It's part of their personal development plans and programs, but it kind of stemmed from the rebranding and opening our minds a bit on that as well. So to keep that sort of culture alive, and therefore that is the perception. It's all one having this as your brand, but when your clients interact with you, it's a different message that they're getting. It's a different experience. It's disjointed. So certainly from us, and I think, as Lesley said, and that was partly why we engaged on the rebranding journey, was we had been a business startup and nobody done anything wrong, and it was with the best intentions of the world, but there'd been different influences, so the message was a bit mixed, and we've got a bit lost in what we thought was a good idea, but was it really? So I think when you get to that stage and you want to accelerate your growth, then it is a good investment, and certainly to work with somebody who grasps your concept and you can work with. But for me, for me personally, in my role that I'm seeing, it's definitely what it's given to us in terms of internally and culture and living the brand. And it's not just words on a website, but what's happening in the back office as well, and everybody's is involved, and it keeps that alive.
Brilliant, thank you. I can see Lesley nodding enthusiastically there as well. Lesley, another question for you that's in the Q&A box here is, you've done all your due diligence, selected a branding consultancy, and are halfway through the rebrand project, but the agency start to deviate from your desired ideas and outcome. How should a client go about rectifying that situation? Have you ever been in a situation where you find it difficult to communicate with a client about their goals and objectives, and how would you recommend they raise that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. No is the answer. However, we have worked with businesses who have got themselves to into a sticky situation, perhaps exactly as the one that's being described there in that question. So you've done all your due diligence, you selected your branding consultancy, and I'm reminded of a project I think probably two and a half years ago where exactly that had happened, and the business involved felt that they were kind of stuck. They'd already invested, and felt, just picking up on that question in the Q&A there, some have sort of powerless to kind of move away, and that felt that they had to accept everything the agency recommends. I don't know the details of that kind of this particular situation, but I would say that act, don't be led go back to your brief, review your objectives, review the outputs, review the measurables, sit down with your agency and have a really straight talking conversation, because much better to stop now or to find a way to move forward where everybody is aligned. But I don't want to talk badly about our industry, because I'm really passionate about this sector and my sector, and work with other agencies across the UK. But I think that people have, as had their fingers burnt when it comes to rebranding. Be really mindful that you stay in charge of the procurement process, and if you have any concerns, you raise them, you get them on the table, and just kind of observe how your agency responds to that. If it's positive and there's a way forward, then good, continue to do that with kind of daily, if not weekly, catch-ups. But if you really feel like you're in the wrong hands, then I think it's really important to draw a line, because it's if you're not going to get what you need, then the investment is obviously not a good one.
Brilliant,
thank you. The question.
Yes, I think so. It sounds like, as you set out during your presentation, those key objectives and open and clear communication are both absolutely key to the branding process and working with an agency. Another question then for, I think Lesley actually again would be a great person to start on this question, and it is, when releasing a new product, is it wise to tie branding to earlier successful products, or to go in a different direction?
Okay, answer to that is I don't know. I think because I guess it depends what that new product is. If it's related to the previous product, if the previous product has equity, if it's the same target audiences and it's an opportunity for cross-selling, then I think there's really it's kind of really wise to consider that approach. You're talking really there about brand architecture. So how does your kind of corporate or company brand, how does that manifest itself, and how do your product brands manifest themselves underneath that, and what's your strategy for developing that? And if you're to release another product in 6 months or 12 months time, have you got an architecture that has got legs to grow almost? Okay. So be really clear on target audiences. And then another thing that I would add to that, I hope I'm answering the question okay, another thing that I would add to that is thinking about future sales. So if you were to potentially sell off a particular part of the business, including that part that has the kind of new product area, if you like, then is it wise or not wise to link it to your company brands? Would it be more sensible to give it a level of distance? And I think that's a fascinating question, and I don't think there's one right answer. I think it very much depends on your your strategic landscape in which you're operating, and the real nuances of your business. But the fact that the question's been asked flags that it's a consideration within that business, and I think that's really important.
Brilliant, thank you, Lesley. Claire, would you have any comments on that just as we finish up the call?
I agree with what Lesley said about it, really. Clearly there's a reason for asking that question, and it's part of your brand equity, the brand architecture, and what message you want to get across. So I agree with Lesley entirely.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've had some feedback in the Q&A box as well, so thank you both for your answers on that. Fay, I will hand back over to you as we bring the webinar to a close.
Lovely, thank you ever so much, everybody, for attending. I hope that you all found it useful and gained some insight from it. As I said earlier, our LinkedIn, I think, profiles are set out on the invitation, so please do feel free to connect with us if you've got any further questions. And I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank our brilliant speakers. It's been a really, really insightful session, and like I said, thank you ever so much for giving us your time.